Do you think the Republicans are going to fiddle with the elections? Do you think they're going to actually either make sure some of them don't happen, or how do you think that's going to happen? What's the mechanism?
I think they're fiddling with the elections right now. That's what the mid-decade redistricting is about. That the president was concerned about them. This is just from reporting that I have seen and stories that I know, that the president was concerned about the ability to retain the House specifically earlier this year, and said, okay, well, we need to do something about this. And that is why they called up Texas and asked them to find him 5 seats. And Texas did that. They've all now also called up Indiana and Missouri. That is a part of it.
Right, but California's responded to that with its own gerrymandering or redistricting, right?
Mm-hmm, but that's not that. There's no guarantee that any of this will be enough. But the point is that it shouldn't have happened in the first place. The president of the United States cannot call up a governor of another state and say, hey, the way the maps are right now, I'm going to lose the election next year. Can you find me 5 more seats so it makes it more likely I win? That is a form of tampering with he's tampering with the maps. He's trying to re-engineer the system so it is better for him. The poll monitors that they sent out, right? These are all test cases and trial balloons. I don't know if they're going to physically, tamper with the votes. I don't think that it has to go that far. I think the infrastructure of elections in this country and the attempts to tinker and tamper with the election infrastructure in this country is enough to give me pause.
Okay, so let me take you to Karoline Leavitt, the White House press spokesperson, who is very much a representative of what's going on in the White House. You've been a press secretary. What do you think of her? We know that Donald Trump calls her machine gun lips. He's always talking about her lips. What do you think about what comes out of her lips?
I think that Karoline Leavitt is being graded on a curve and I think a lot of the Trump people are, frankly, graded on a curve that would never be afforded to, that would have never been afforded to Joe Biden and would never be afforded to insert any other Democratic president that's there.
What does that mean?
I think she's being graded on a curve. She's not she gets up there and she will not tell the truth and lie. She will lie. She has lied from the podium before. And when she lies, she says it with authority and then moves on to the next person. And a lot of times the reporters in the press briefing room do not press her. Now, I would argue as of late, when it comes to what is happening with the government shutdown and SNAP, the reporters have been a little more pointed in their questioning because it's just not adding up and it's not making sense. But I think that just because one speaks with authority, right? This is the Trumpism of it all, right? You speak with authority, you seem to be in command of what you're saying, and it's like, okay, so the content doesn't matter. You're accessible to the reporters, right? Because that's one of the arguments from a lot of folks from the White House press corps. Well, Biden wasn't really accessible. Donald Trump is very accessible. Karoline Leavitt, we can get answers from her. Is the accessibility the point or the information? And I think that they have found, this Trump White House found a very willing participant in Karoline Leavitt. Was she new at the job? Had she ever been a press secretary before? No. Was she a comms person? No. But she is a soldier. And that is those are the requirements for the Trump administration right now. They don't necessarily care about your qualifications. They care if you're going to toe the line for the president and defend him and his agenda at all costs. And if that is the barometer of which she is being graded, then she's hitting all the marks, because regardless of what it is, she concedes nothing. She will relent nothing. There's nothing they ever did wrong. She'll stand up on the podium and say things that are in direct contradiction to what a cabinet secretary just put out or just said somewhere else. And it's like, oh, well, Karoline Leavitt said it, so it must be true.
So if you were grading her, what grade would you give her?
A very, very low marks. I mean, I guess I'd give a D. They're lying. I'd give a D. I don't give an F because, I give a D because she stands up there regularly and doesn't tell the truth. But part of that is not only on her. The people who are asking the questions have to be about the business of asking the questions in the briefing room without fear or favor. And the reality is that this particular White House has punished reporters. It wasn't that long ago that we were all talking about the Associated Press and the fact that they were being excluded from not just press briefings, but like they were excluded from anything with the president. The wires, the Associated Press not being in the room. And what was the public response from the other reporters in the room? They literally would walk into rooms where the Associated Press was kept out of and not even ask a question on their behalf. So I do think that the reporters in the briefing room are struggling through their own way of how can they effectively do their jobs in this environment. And Karoline Leavitt and Donald Trump understand that very much so. The president is nothing if not a master marketer. I will absolutely give him that. And they understand pain points. They clearly understand leverage. Just to be clear, Joanna, I worked with all of these reporters when I was at the White House. I just, some of the things they allow the Trump folks to get away with, some of the answers they just let them walk away from, I am aghast because I'm like, that would have never happened a year ago. That would have never been sufficient a year ago. The President of the United States seemed to be asleep in an event in the Oval Office for about 20 minutes the other day. And then someone who was at that press conference passed out behind him, and he stood up and didn't even turn around and check on him. I think the president just woke up. I don't know what happened. Why? Where are the questions about that? This is what I'm talking about being graded on the curve. It's like we all just moved on. Now, to his credit, he came back when they finally resumed the press event, and he seemed very alert and awake. I don't know if he got a Celsius, a Red Bull, a cup of green tea, or an espresso. But are y'all seriously trying to tell me that if Joe Biden was asleep in the Oval Office for 20 minutes on camera, that wouldn't have been the only thing? No reporter would have asked questions and said, excuse me, it seems like the president is asleep.
Symone, you mentioned Trump falling asleep for 20 minutes in the White House. Is that a national security concern?
I think it could be, for sure. To me, when I saw that, it made me, it brought up the questions again about, okay, what is the actual apparatus of this White House? Who is actually in charge here? Because that can't be the first time the president fell asleep. You know how I know? Because they didn't bat an eye. They didn't. That is not the first time the president fell asleep. So when that happens, who is making the decisions? I think about when, I've got my notebook here, when the president was doing these public signings of these executive orders, and they come in and they explain to him what the executive order is, and he's like, oh, okay, yeah. Well, sir, is that the first time is this the first time you are hearing about this? Did the president not get it? Did the president sign off on this in advance? Who is signing off on the particulars of what is happening in this White House? I hearken back to Stephen Miller a couple weeks ago doing interviews with reporters, and he was using terms like I and we. When I worked at the White House, it is not I or we, it is the president and the vice president. But you serve at the pleasure of the president. And so if we're using I statements, are you the one making the decision, Stephen Miller, about these strike force teams? How much aware is the president of what is going on? These are all questions I think that deserve to be asked. And he fell asleep for 20 minutes, and it wasn't even a blip. If Joe Biden was asleep for 20 minutes in front of the cameras, baby, it would be breaking news for 3 weeks.
There's a lot of argument, and you've referred to it, that Donald Trump is available and he's transparent in terms of what his plans are. When you were at the White House, was there an attempt to shield Joe Biden from the press and from the public because he wasn't up to the job?
So I would say no. And I worked in the White House in the first year, and I know that there are, people have many thoughts about what happened that year and then in years after in that Biden White House. But I will say it's my understanding that the thought was that they didn't prioritize legacy media and legacy press. Like they didn't, and by they I mean some of the advisors to the president didn't think that the Sunday shows, for example, were important. That's a relic of the past. Now, I think that there's arguments to be made either way. But on one hand, you are still, you got to play, in my opinion, you have to play ball, right? So whether you think they're important or not, some people are still watching them, and the press corps thinks it's important. So if you don't give them anything, you give them room to say a whole lot of extra things. So you have to give them some kind of access. Their thought, and again, advisors to the president, when I worked at the White House, the thought was, well, he does a lot of gaggles. And so, he goes over, he speaks to the reporters, but did he do a lot of formal sit downs? No. And did he not? And I think the thought that he didn't do them because he couldn't is wrong. I think the reality is he didn't do them because he didn't want to. And maybe that's just a tougher, that's just like, that's maybe a little more crass way to a crass explanation. But in knowing the president, President Biden, and in knowing the people that were around him at the time, and having spoken to him many times since I had left the White House and recently, I think that is true. It's not that he couldn't. I don't think he wanted to. And frankly, I don't think some of the people around him wanted him to, because remember way back when Joe Biden did that, he did a press conference. It was one of a few press conferences that he did at the White House, and it was maybe 40 minutes. And it was during that press conference where he essentially said that he doesn't know how Vladimir Putin could continue to be the president once this is all over of Russia. Mm-hmm. And then the next morning, or the next day, actually, afternoon, people tried to staff were walking back the president's comments. To be clear, Joe Biden said what a lot of people actually believe to be true, what he believes to be true. But the staff didn't like his answer. And I just think, well, the president of the United States, this happens with Donald Trump a lot too. Donald Trump will say some things and sometimes the staff doesn't like the answer. Privately, they'll be like, but the difference is publicly they'll defend him. I think that whether you like whether you like the unfilteredness of the president or not, at the end of the day, they are in fact the president. But nobody is kept Joe Biden in a box and was like, you can't do this.
So let me ask you something. When we saw him at the now infamous debate with Donald Trump, he didn't appear to be capable of finishing certain sentences. That can't be the first time that had happened to him. Do people in the White House know that he couldn't do this? I don't understand how he could get to that debate in that condition, and people in the White House have not seen that.
Yeah, I don't know. I had never seen that when I had worked for Joe Biden, and I was looking at the debate shocked just as much as everyone else, texting the people whom I know had been in debate prep and said, well, what is going on? And they all said the same thing, right? He has a cold, he's been traveling. But again, this goes back to the mechanics, as you want to put your candidate in the best position to succeed. So if you remember, the president had just done these back-to-back trips to Europe.
He'd had 10 days at Camp David to prepare, though.
He was out campaigning domestically. I just don't think the schedule boded well for what they had going on.